The canyon held its breath as the day bled into night. Heat shimmered above the scrub and rock, fading to a deep copper glow as the sun sagged behind the jagged mesas. A lone wind crept through the mesquite, carrying the sharp scent of dust and sage, rattling dry seed pods like bones in a gambler's cup. Coyotes answered one another across the emptiness, their howls thin and mournful, a chorus for the dying light. At the edge of that wilderness, where the land seemed to tilt into endless sky, stood a modest spread of timber and stone. The Ellison Ranch looked small against the vastness, a dark silhouette hemmed in by scorched grass and the ghostly silver of the arroyo. Fences leaned from years of wind. The barn door sagged on a rusted hinge. Yet every line of the place held stubborn dignity, as if the earth itself respected the woman who kept it alive. Mara Ellison stepped onto the porch with a slow grace that belied the weight she carried. She brushed a strand of black hair from her brow and scanned the horizon the way a hawk sizes the prairie. In the fading light her face seemed carved from the same stone as the canyon walls, angular, sunburnished, eyes the cool gray of river slate. A scar crossed her left cheek, narrow and pale, a single stroke of old violence she made no effort to hide. She'd been working since first light, mending a fence line that the last storm had toppled. Her palms were raw, her back tight from lifting cedar posts, but she moved with the calm endurance of someone who had long ago learned to outlast both weather and men. Inside the house, a lantern glowed faintly through the window, softening the hard edges of the evening. On the porch rail rested a rifle older than she was, a Springfield trapdoor carbine, its metal darkened by decades of oil and dust. Few would know it had once been Army issue, carried in campaigns where the maps of the West were drawn with blood. Fewer still would guess it had never missed a mark in her hands. She lowered herself into a chair and let the silence settle. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that waits. Somewhere beyond the mesas, a dust devil twisted like smoke. The air tasted of iron, a metallic hint that rode the breeze ahead of the coming night. She knew that scent from long ago, when soldiers camped under blood-red skies and the world turned on the crack of rifles. Inside the house, hidden beneath a floorboard, lay a folded piece of paper worn soft as cloth. Its edges were singed from the day she almost burned it, back when grief still ruled her like a tyrant. The telegram's words had faded, but she could recite them in the dark. Asterisk Thomas Ellison killed in border raid. Remains unrecovered. Asterisk her husband's death had come swift and brutal, leaving her the land they'd barely begun to tame. The Army's polite condolences had been the final insult. She still felt the weight of that night when the officers left, their boots heavy on her porch, their eyes averted. She had not wept then. Instead she had ridden out alone into the desert, the telegram crushed in her fist, the Springfield across her saddle. Somewhere in that barren silence she had buried the last softness of her heart. The sky deepened to purple and then to black velvet strewn with stars. A thin crescent moon floated above the canyon like a watchful eye. Mara rose and moved along the porch, her boots whispering on the worn planks. The cattle had gone quiet, bunched in the far pasture where the ground dipped toward the creek. Even the coyotes had stilled. Only the wind moved, teasing the edges of her coat. She felt it then, a faint tremor through the boards beneath her feet, subtle as a heartbeat. She stilled, tilting her head. The sound followed, distant but distinct, the low, rhythmic thud of hooves striking hardpan. Riders. She turned her face to the dark horizon. Far to the south, beyond the last rise, a smear of dust caught the moonlight. It lingered too long to be the evening breeze. Her breath slowed, steady and deliberate, as memory sharpened her senses. She counted the beats between hoof-falls, the way she once did when scouting patrols through hostile country. More than 3, less than 10, enough to trouble a lone ranch. Mara stepped inside and closed the door without a sound. The room smelled of pine pitch and gun oil. She moved with practiced efficiency, striking the lantern wick low until only a faint ember glowed. Her fingers found the familiar contours of a Springfield, the smooth worn stock fitting her palm like an old friend. She checked the chamber, the motion automatic, a ritual of survival older than words. From the back window she watched the land. The dust plume thickened, breaking into separate strands where the moonlight caught it. Shadows moved within it, men on horseback, their outlines sharp against the silver desert. They rode in a loose formation, careless, certain of their power. Mara's jaw tightened. Bandits or bounty hunters, it made no difference. She had seen their kind before, men who thought the frontier existed to be taken, that a woman alone meant easy spoils. She'd buried men like them, long ago, in places where only the buzzards remembered. The ranch creaked around her as the night wind shifted. She felt the house breathe, every timber and nail aware of what approached. Somewhere in the distance a lone owl called once, then fell silent. Mara rested the rifle across the windowsill, her eye tracing the path the riders would take. The old army instinct stirred like embers under ash. Distances, angles, the rhythm of approaching hoofbeats, all of it settled into her mind with cold precision. Beyond the darkened pasture, the canyon stretched wide and merciless. The horizon pulsed with faint light where a campfire might flare or a torch might catch. The smell of smoke, real smoke now, drifted on the breeze, subtle but certain. She thought of Thomas for a fleeting moment, of the life they had tried to build with cattle and cedar fence posts, of laughter under a sky as endless as today's. Then she pushed the thought aside. The dead could not help the living. The hoofbeats grew louder, rolling like distant thunder across the hardpan. The ground itself seemed to vibrate, carrying the weight of oncoming menace. Mara steadied her breathing, each inhale measured, each exhale a silent vow. The desert night watched without mercy. And as the first faint sparks of torchlight flickered against the horizon, Mara Ellison stood alone in the darkness, rifle ready, the blood-red sky behind her fading to black. The first sound was not the expected thunder of hooves, but a high, shrill whistle that cut across the dark like a hawk's cry. Mara lifted her head from the window, every sense tightening. A heartbeat later came the rush of hooves, a dozen or more, pounding the hardpan in a syncopated roar. Torchlight burst over the ridge, orange flares bobbing against the indigo night. The riders fanned out with practiced menace, their silhouettes sharp and black. At their center rode a man cloaked in a coat of raven feathers that glimmered when the firelight caught them, Jeb Crow Murdoch. His legend reached across counties, a thief with a preacher's voice and a killer's grin. The gang descended like a storm. Torches arced through the air, trailing sparks that fell like fireflies turned wicked. One struck the hay barn with a muffled thud, and dry straw leapt into flame. Another torch tumbled across the corral fence, setting the brittle boards ablaze in a sudden curtain of orange. The night filled with the roar of fire and the panic bawling of cattle. Mara moved. There was no startled gasp, no frantic scramble, only swift precision born of years when hesitation meant death. She crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling the lantern low until darkness claimed the walls. Her boots struck the floorboards with quiet certainty as she slid the Springfield into the crook of her arm. Outside, the gang hooped and hollered, their laughter cracking like rifle shots. Horses screamed in the chaos, hooves pounding as the herd scattered toward the arroyo. Sparks lifted into the wind, carried high above the canyon like a swarm of angry stars. Mara slipped through the kitchen door and into the night. The air stung her lungs with smoke and heat, the sky pulsing with the lurid glow of burning wood. 2 ranch hands, boys hardly old enough to shave, stumbled toward her from the bunkhouse, their faces pale in the firelight. "Miss Ellison," one cried, eyes wide with terror. "They'll kill us." "Not if you ride," she answered, voice level. She pressed a revolver into the older boy's shaking hands. "Take the north trail. Keep to the dry creek bed and don't stop till you hit Miller's Crossing. Go." The younger hesitated, glancing toward the corral where flames licked the night. "But the herd." "They're already gone," she said. "You save yourselves." The boys fled into the shadows, spurred by the certainty in her tone. Mara watched until the darkness swallowed them, then turned back to the inferno. Fire chewed through the barn roof with greedy crackles, each beam collapsing in a spray of sparks. Heat rolled across the yard, a living thing that pressed against her skin and filled the air with the bitter scent of scorched cedar. Through the shimmering haze she saw Murdoch's silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, a black shape against the flames. He sat his horse with easy arrogance, the feathers of his coat whispering like wings in the rising heat. "Evening, Widow Ellison," his voice carried, deep and resonant, a mockery of civility. "Fine night for a bonfire." His men laughed, a jagged chorus. One flung another torch toward the water trough, where it hissed and spat like a struck snake. Mara did not answer. She crouched behind a rain barrel, calculating distances, wind direction, the rhythm of their movement. She could pick them off one by one. But she held the rifle steady and still, waiting. The smoke clawed at her throat, sharp with memories. Another night, another fire, the border raid that had taken Thomas. She saw again the distant flare of torches, the sudden thunder of hooves, the cold silence after the gunfire. She had ridden through that smoke with a carbine hot in her hands, searching for a body she never found. The telegram had been all that came back. Her chest tightened, a pressure of grief and rage so old it felt like bone. The pain did not weaken her. It sharpened her like a whetstone to a blade. A sudden crash shattered the moment. One of the gang kicked open the side door of the house, sending splinters into the night. Mara's stomach clenched as she saw the flicker of fire inside. One of them had hurled a torch through a window. Curtains ignited with a soft whoosh, and in seconds the flames raced up the wooden walls. Crow Murdoch raised a hand, and the chaos stilled. Even the horses seemed to pause, their nostrils flaring in the smoke. "Come out, widow," he called, voice slick with confidence. "No need to hide in the ashes. We only want the gold your husband buried. Give it over, and maybe we'll leave you breathing." Mara knew there was no gold. Thomas had died poor, leaving her nothing but land and memory. The lie was an excuse. Men like Murdoch didn't need reasons. She backed toward the smoke-thick doorway, the heat pushing against her like a living wall. Sparks clung to her coat, and the smell of burning pine filled her nose. She could feel the house shudder as the fire climbed the beams, could hear the low groan of timbers ready to collapse. Her mind worked with cold precision. The boys were clear. The herd would find water down the arroyo. The gang would grow drunk on their own destruction. And she would not be here when they came inside. Mara slid along the shadowed wall, every step measured. The roar of flames drowned the sound of her boots as she disappeared into the dark gap between house and barn. Smoke wrapped her like a cloak, thick and bitter, stinging her eyes until tears cut clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. Behind her, the house gave a low, splintering sigh. A window burst outward in a cascade of sparks. Flames surged high, a red and gold tower against the night. The gang shouted in savage glee, their torches held aloft like conquering banners. Mara slipped into the mesquite, the smoke swallowing her whole. The last thing she heard before the night closed around her was Crow Murdoch's laughter, rich, triumphant, certain he had cornered his prey. But the darkness knew otherwise. The canyon swallowed her whole. Smoke clung to her hair like memory. Her boots sank into the dry earth where sagebrush twisted in defiant knots and the moonlight cut long silver lines through the ravine. She didn't run. She moved like water, low and silent, slipping between boulders and black oaks, her breath even, her rifle tight against her side. Behind her, the glow of her burning home pulsed against the sky, a false sunrise born of ruin. The gang's voices still echoed across the ridge, drunk with victory, laughter laced with cruelty. They believed she had burned with the house or fled like a frightened deer into the night. Either suited them. Either meant they'd won. But Mara Ellison had never fled from fire. She had once crawled through a field of flame for a dying soldier who hadn't even known her name. The trail curved down into a hollow vale by juniper and stone. She paused there, listening. No footsteps. No horses. Only the distant rustle of wind through dry leaves and the occasional crack of timber collapsing under its own weight. Satisfied, she knelt before the gnarled roots of a fallen tree. She brushed aside loose dirt and pine needles until her fingers touched iron. A shallow breath escaped her lips. The cache was still there. She lifted the lid of the rusted tin box and revealed a neatly folded duster coat, weathered by time but intact. Beneath it, wrapped in oilskin, lay a Colt Army revolver and a box of cartridges. Alongside them, a battered leather pouch. She opened it with a slow reverence. Inside lay 3 medals, 2 for sharpshooting, 1 for field bravery, each dulled with age but untouched by rust. A small tin badge rested beside them, its edges worn but the words still visible, U.S. Army Scout. The insignia of a ghost. The Army had declared her dead after the border raid that killed Thomas. Let them. The dead moved freer than the living. She shrugged on the duster, its weight familiar, the canvas molded to the curve of her shoulders like a second skin. The hat came next, brim wide and low, shadowing her face. Last, she slid the revolver into the holster on her hip and checked the Springfield sight one final time. She was no longer the widow of Ellison Ranch. She was what she had always been before love softened her edges, silent, swift, and lethal. The canyon split into narrow veins, steep paths worn by wind and mountain goats. Mara climbed, her fingers brushing the cool stone for balance, until she reached a ridge that overlooked the southern trail leading to the ranch. Below, in the basin near the burned-out corral, flickers of orange still danced as the outlaws caroused. They'd set up makeshift camps, bedding down among the wreckage like wolves fat with the kill. They had no idea the storm had only begun. She set to work, her hands moving without hesitation. A tripwire stretched across a narrow goat path, invisible under the dust, looped through a low juniper and secured to a pile of loose shale above. One tug would bring it all down. Further along, She carved grooves into the sandstone and nestled sharpened stakes into the brush, disguised beneath scattered leaves and brittle twigs. Another blind led to a rock shelf, where she could lie prone with the Springfield and see both western passes. Each trap was simple, silent, deadly. As she worked, the night wrapped tighter around her. Coyotes kept distant, their earlier howls hushed. The wind rose in mournful bursts, pushing smoke further into the canyon and masking her scent. Perfect conditions for a hunt. She remembered her first kill. Not a man, but a deer. She had been 16, smaller than her brothers, trembling in the tall grass as the animal approached. Her father had whispered, "Don't breathe. Don't think. Let your heart slow until it matches the earth." She'd listened. Now, decades later, that same silence filled her. Not anger. Not even vengeance. Just a patient, ancient stillness, like stone watching a flood. Below, Murdoch's gang passed a bottle between them. Their words floated up in jagged laughter. "Burned real nice, didn't it?" She squealed. "You think?" "Nah. Bet she's halfway to Mexico by now. Or Ash." They were not men. They were fools with guns. And fools forgot that legends always came wearing dust and silence. Mara slid into position on the bluff, the rifle nestled against her shoulder. From this perch, she had a clear line to the center of the camp. A long shot, but not impossible. She would wait. Let the traps do the first speaking. The cold crept in. She welcomed it. In the stillness, memories flickered. Thomas laughing under the cottonwood tree. The feel of his hand on hers. The night he told her he wanted a child. She had buried that hope along with his name. But not his fire. His fire burned in her now. Below, one outlaw stumbled toward the canyon trail to relieve himself. He paused to kick something glowing in the ash, unaware that one more step would catch the snare line strung across the stones. Mara watched him disappear into the darkness. A rustle. A clatter of pebbles. Then silence. She smiled. Let them celebrate. Let them boast. The canyon had already chosen sides. And by the time dawn broke, they would learn what it meant to wake the dead. The canyon held its breath. Mara lay still on the ridge, the Springfield nestled against her cheek, her heartbeat so slow it barely existed. Wind brushed across the stone, stirring dust in soft spirals, and far below, the men still laughed. She chose the one standing near the wagon, silhouetted against the flickering firelight, tipping a bottle to his lips. Her breath sank, timed to the weight of her trigger finger. One squeeze. The shot cracked like the sky had split open. It wasn't just a rifle. It was the sound of something ancient, rising from stone and memory and judgment itself. The canyon took it and sent it hurtling in every direction, bouncing from cliff to cliff until the echoes felt like a dozen guns speaking at once. The outlaw dropped before the bottle hit the ground. For a beat, no one moved. Then chaos. Sniper. Get down. Where? Where the hell? They scrambled like rats, knocking over bedrolls and stumbling into each other. One man dove behind a charred beam just as Mara adjusted her aim and fired again. The beam shattered. He didn't get back up. Her breath came short, sharp. She moved like water, rolling to a second blind behind a cedar, sights already tracking. Another shot, and another body crumpled, hand still gripping the pistol he hadn't fired. They hadn't expected war. Not here. Not from her. Below, one of them fired wildly into the rocks. The bullet pinged off stone 3 feet to her left. She didn't flinch. She waited. When he stood again, shouting into the night, she silenced him with a single shot to the chest. In the firelight, Crow Murdoch stood tall, eyes scanning the ridge like a man chasing ghosts. "Show yourself," he roared. "You ain't scaring me, witch." His voice echoed, but it no longer commanded. It pleaded. Another outlaw sprinted for a horse. Mara waited until he was halfway to the saddle. One shot. The horse reared in panic and the rider tumbled hard. He never moved again. Years vanished between the sound of gunfire. She was back in her army days, prone behind a crate outside San Miguel, picking off raiders from a half-mile ridge. She remembered the weight of her captain's hand on her shoulder. "Ellison, you shoot like God's fury." She'd smiled, young and deadly, and said, "Sir, I only shoot like a woman tired of burying men." She fired again. Another scream, another echo. Murdoch's men fired blindly now, into shadows, into rocks, into their own fear. One man tripped over the snare she'd rigged along the north ridge and went down hard. A second later, the rocks above him collapsed. Dust billowed up like smoke from a holy reckoning. Mara moved again, crawling over the ridge like part of the stone. She reached her third perch, a small outcrop nestled above a deer path, and reloaded. Her fingers were calm, steady, as if they'd waited for this night all her life. 3 left. One tried sneaking around the boulders to flank her. She let him get close. Closer. When his boots scraped just behind the ledge, she pivoted and drove the butt of the rifle into his face. Bone cracked. He crumpled without a sound. 2 left. Murdoch and the boy with the scar on his cheek, the one who'd lit her porch like it was a festival. She waited. The scarred one stumbled into the open, shouting, "She's not human. She's a ghost." Mara's voice drifted from the darkness, cool and calm. "You wanted war. This is war." The boy turned too fast, saw nothing, fired at shadows. Mara's last shot rang out like a bell. He dropped. Only Murdoch remained. The fire had burned low, casting long, twitching shadows. He stood at its edge, revolver in hand, feathers of his black coat torn, face raw with fury and disbelief. "Where are you?" he shouted, eyes wild. "You think you're a judge? You think you get to choose who lives and dies?" She didn't answer. He turned in a slow circle, breathing hard, blood dark on his side. "I killed men who deserved it," he bellowed. "I took from folks who had plenty." His voice faltered. His hand shook. "Who are you?" he muttered, almost to himself now. Mara stepped from the shadows. The moonlight lit her face, soot-streaked, eyes cold, the Springfield in her arms like an extension of her spine. Her coat flared slightly in the wind, and the badge beneath her collar gleamed just once. U.S. Army Scout. Murdoch's breath hitched. "Hell," he whispered. The wind sighed around them. The canyon, silent once more, waited for her verdict. The horizon blushed with the first touch of dawn, a thin gold line cleaving the dark sky from the bloodied earth. Wind tugged at Mara's coat, pulling the hem toward the canyon's lip, where a jagged cliff dropped 100 feet into the whispering rocks below. Jeb Murdoch stood 10 paces from her, panting, his revolver hanging low in his hand. Blood darkened the side of his shirt, soaking into the feathers stitched along his coat like a spreading shadow. His eyes, once smug and sure, were glassy with disbelief and pain, yet still burned with something feral. They faced each other in the silence between worlds, night refusing to die, day not yet born. "You look tired, widow," he rasped, voice raw from smoke and shouting. "But I guess vengeance'll do that to a woman." She said nothing, only stood with the rifle loose in her hands, her silhouette outlined against the rising sun. Murdoch's lip curled. "All this, for what? Cows? Some dusty house. You're just a widow with a gun." Mara took one slow step forward. Her boots crunched softly over the stone. "No. I was a widow with a dream. Now I'm something you understand even less." He spat toward the ground, teeth stained red. "You think you're better than me? Hiding behind a badge you probably stole off some dead man." She slid the rifle behind her, lifted the collar of her duster, and revealed the rusted insignia pinned just beneath, "Captain Ellison, Union Army." Below it, a silver medallion engraved with a rifle and laurel leaves. The mark of sharpshooter's honor. He blinked. "No. You died in the raid. That's what they said." "I was left for dead," she said, voice steady. "And maybe a part of me did die. But the part that shoots, that part never missed." The canyon wind gusted, tugging at their clothes like ghosts eager for resolution. Mara's voice lowered, quieter than the breeze. "You could have stolen horses, taken supplies. But you torched the barn. You threw fire through the windows. You laughed when the house burned." "You want me to cry?" he snarled, taking a shaky step toward her. "This is the West, woman. Weak die. Strong take. I didn't build the rules." "No," she said. "But you broke what little good was left in them." They stood now only 5 paces apart, the sun catching the edge of her cheekbone, glinting off the metal at her breast. Murdoch's hand twitched toward the revolver at his side. "I buried men," she said softly. "Some who deserved it. Some who didn't. I didn't ask for justice then. But I'll ask you now, Jeb. Drop your weapon. Let what's left of you face the law." He laughed, dry and broken. "Law? You are the law now." "No," she said. "I'm what comes when the law doesn't." He stared at her, eyes wild, blood crusting his chin. Then he screamed, an ugly, choke sound, and lunged. Her hand moved before thought did. The rifle came up in a single, fluid motion, trained by years in war and the simple need to survive. The crack split the dawn like thunder from a sermon. Jeb's body jerked. He staggered back one step. Two. His revolver clattered to the rocks. And then he fell. Not into the canyon. Just there, on the rim. One arm stretched toward the edge. His eyes, still open, fixed on the growing light as if trying to comprehend it. Mara stood for a long time, the barrel of the rifle smoking faintly in the morning chill. The sun crested fully now, spilling light across the desert and cliffs, washing the ash-stained world in new gold. She walked to him, slowly, and knelt beside his still body. She reached down and closed his eyes. "No more judgment," she whispered. Behind her, the wind shifted, carrying away the last echoes of fire and gunpowder. The world felt emptier. Not better. Just quieter. She rose alone, as always. The rifle slung across her back, her boots heading away from the edge, not toward salvation, but whatever came next. Smoke still curled from the blackened beams, rising in lazy ribbons toward the soft morning sky. The wind carried the scent of scorched wood and dust, but beneath it was something faint and clean, the promise of rain on distant mountains, or maybe just the peace that comes when battle ends. Mara stood at the edge of what had once been her home, boots planted firm in the ashen earth. The house was gone, its walls collapsed inward like a body finally allowed to rest. The barn was nothing but a skeleton of beams and twisted iron. The corral fence lay scattered in splinters. Yet she didn't weak. Her eyes were dry, sharp with clarity. Grief had burned in her long before fire ever touched the land. The rifle leaned against a scorched post beside her, stock resting in the dust, barrel pointed toward the rising sun. It had not left her side since the first shot. Not during the hunt. Not during Murdoch's fall. Not even now, with the danger behind her and the world briefly still. A bird landed on a nearby rail, charred black but still upright. It cocked its head, blinked once, then lifted into the air again, as if to say the land wasn't dead, just paused. Hoofbeats approached from the north. Slow, uncertain. Mara turned but did not reach for the rifle. First came the boys, her ranch hands, their faces pale and wide-eyed, guilt riding them harder than any outlaw. One dismounted and took off his hat. We thought you were gone, Miss Ellison." "I was here," she said simply. Behind them came others, neighbors from scattered homesteads. Men with calloused hands and sunburned necks, women with braids tied back in scarves, children clutching at skirts, eyes wide. They saw the smoke and expected to find silence. Instead, they found her. No one spoke for a long time. They looked at the bodies still cooling in the canyon, the trails rigged with traps, the blood-soaked dust beneath the rim. They looked at the rifle, at her coat, at the badge still glinting faintly beneath the edge of her collar. "You did all this?" one of the ranchers asked, barely a whisper. She nodded once. "They came in the night. And you sent them back to hell." Someone muttered a prayer. Another took off their hat. The tale would spread fast. Before noon, it would pass over fences and through Sunday sermons, whispered in saloons and shouted in barbershops. A dozen riders against one woman. A burning ranch. A shot that cracked the canyon like Judgment Day itself. Mara didn't feed the stories. She said only what needed saying. That the men had come. That they had asked for blood. That she had answered. When one of the older women stepped forward with a hand extended in sympathy, Mara didn't pull away. But she didn't hold it long. There was work to do. By midday, she was already clearing the barn remains, dragging charred boards into a pile. The rifle leaned nearby, still within reach, as if daring the earth to test her again. The boys tried to help, fumbling with ropes and buckets, watching her out of the corners of their eyes like she might vanish if they looked too directly. One finally asked, "Miss Ellison, you ever think about leaving?" She paused, wiping soot from her cheek with the back of her sleeve. "Where would I go?" He didn't answer. The sun climbed higher, golden and bright. Ash sparkled in the light like dusted silver, and the canyon wind swept it all westward, as if cleaning the page for something new. By evening, the wreckage no longer smoldered. The ground, blackened and raw, waited quietly. So did she. That night, she sat by a makeshift fire beside the surviving well. No roof overhead. No walls around her. Only the stars, sharp and countless above, and the rifle resting across her knees. Her shadow stretched long in the firelight, and for a moment, She looked like something carved into the land itself, timeless, eternal. Days passed. The world didn't stop. Chickens still wandered the brush. A stray calf bleated from a nearby gulch. A neighbor brought lumber. Someone else dropped off nails. No one said much. They just worked. They knew legends when they saw them. By the end of the week, a new frame stood where the house had burned. Simple. Strong. She hung no curtains. No photographs. Just the tools she needed. Just the weapons she trusted. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and the shadows painted long fingers across the plains, Mara saddled her horse. She slung the rifle over her back, mounted with quiet ease, and turned toward the open land. They watched her go from the edge of the rebuilt corral. No one called after her. No one dared. She rode east, toward the rise, toward the light, toward whatever waited beyond the horizon. Wind teased the edge of her coat. Dust rose beneath her boots. Her silhouette blurred against the golden sky. And in the stillness that followed, the canyon held a single truth, passed from one breath to the next. She had answered fire with fire. And the land would remember her name. Mara Ellison. The shot that echoed like judgment. The woman who never missed.